Hello, it's Joel from the Talking Men, and this is my first podcast, first tier list from the podcast. And this is actually a re-recording because I did a whole recording and my mic decided to not work despite me checking it beforehand. So I'm just going to go through this again. To start off with, I'm just going to quickly get the ones out of the way that I haven't played. Oops. Alright. Where is that? 11 and there we go. So again, I started with 12. First one I beat was 7, and about 2016 I started just playing through a significant amount of these, and yeah, I do like this franchise quite a lot. It's obviously some more than others, and I'll go through this. Any other podcasts will be on my Twitch channel, and any other tier lists, give me a recommendation in the comments if you want to hear any of them. So let's begin with FF1. I'm going to go and more or less put this as a C tier. I'm going to also put the row below as not played. I do believe there are D tiers, so I think it's very appropriate I just move these down here. Yeah, so I think FF1 is an okay game. It's obviously aged significantly. I do like the theme of it. I like the fact that you can choose your classes. I like how free it is, how much of a fantasy it genuinely feels. My complaint really comes from that it kind of comes from that as well, because whilst it is fantasy, it doesn't feel like it does much enough to kind of want me to make me play more. It's very just go and explore. Like, there's no real guidance. It can be a bit tedious, and it just a bit tiring to me. I do see promise there, and I can see it as an enjoyable, fun game. But I kind of do prefer a lot of the other games. Similarly, so with 2, I think 2 does get a little bit too much hate. I understand the issue of the combat system. It definitely is there for the people who absolutely just love the grind, and it can be really off-putting. I only played about a couple of hours of this one, and I did kind of enjoy that they did have a bit more of a story focus on this one. And yeah, it's obviously character driven, that you wanted to get attached to your character, make it a bit more personal, rather than choosing the blank slate here and just being stuck with a blank slate. I did appreciate that, and I do. I think it's maybe just a bit overwhelming gameplay wise, because you sit there and like, what I've got to just you constantly use this to get leveled up, and it's a system that makes sense. It definitely feels like it's maybe one not suited for a video game, maybe for like a board game potentially. I am more interested in finishing this one than I am for 2, and then 1, and that's saying something, I believe. For 3, where are you? 3 is oh sorry, oh, I need to just move this up. Didn't realise that. 3, I similarly as the first 2, I haven't played much of it, but this one I genuinely was really struggling with. I played the DS remake of it, and I just couldn't enjoy it. Story wise, it just did not even engage me at all. Gameplay wise, I think it may have been because it was a DS remake, it just felt really slow and boring. And I do appreciate the graphics of the 3D style. I definitely do think the 2D suits the earlier Final Fantasies better. And each game is stylized in its original format, I think, is how it's perfectly suited. But this one, it just honestly did not click with me at all. And I don't really have much to say on that one. More I do have to say on is FF4, and I think that is a solid B tier game. Like, it has an ambitious story, very much more ambitious than the others. The music's great. The combat is the foundation of the ATB, and I appreciate that. The game genuinely tries to do a lot more of the characters in the world. This is a big step up of a game, and I can see why everyone, like a lot of people, consider it their favorite because it is groundbreaking for its time. It has the only thing stopping it, obviously, I think, is it's just some outclassed it since, and towards the end, the spoilers turning around of not accepting deaths and just bringing them back, and once it goes to the moon, it goes a bit wonky, and it kind of just goes, oh, okay, it takes me out a little bit, but again, for the most part, it's a solid experience. And I hear that the after years, I think that's AF, after years, is more or less the same, and I'm not particularly interested in kind of something that retreads the same water. FF5, I just absolutely adore. I played this after I played 6, then 4. Everyone says this is the black sheep of the SNES trilogy. This is my favorite, and I wouldn't have thought it. It is a very grindy game, but there's just something so fun about it. I think I just like the job system. It's very similar to FF12's, I feel, in terms of how customizable the characters are, especially like Zodiac Age 12. But like, it just it's so awesome. It feels overwhelming, but like, it's also exciting at the same time. The world, I think, is honestly the one of the best FF worlds. I've never seen anyone talk about it, and like, it's just staggering because you have three different world maps, and it just shows the progression of the world. It's even a game about doing much of the side stuff. Like I know there's like a castle with Exdeath, going in there to get all the weapons. It's a very combat heavy game. Like a lot of the side stuff I did find, like Ramu, I think Shiva or Leviathan or something, when you go into the castle and you set the water and you just whoops, boss fight. I love how you can just walk into it. It's just like, oh god, you have to be on your. You can just find anything, anyone. I love kind of how that game is structured to just find anything at any point. The music I think is fantastic. There's a lot of charm in this game, and I think this is one of the games that shows the charm of Final Fantasy the most. Yeah, villain wise, I think it is a step up because I forget his name from the first from 4. The first 3 I hadn't really met the final villains, but I love Exdeath. I love the plot itself. It's a very good journey. It genuinely feels charming, and just actually like a genuine fantasy adventure. It just incorporates so many elements well without being like, this is weird. And for the last of the NES trilogy, let's go with FS6 now. Sorry for the coughing. This one is honestly incredibly solid. This one, I don't think it could ever live up to the hype in my head that I've heard from everyone else, but I think it does a very good job. Because the first 2/3 of the game until the world request is just phenomenal. It's so incredibly paced. The battle system is really good. The upgrade system is really good. The characters are lovely. It's just such a charming game to play, and it's incredibly well written. Like I just can't praise this game enough. It's just so good. My main issue stopping it from being S rank comes from the World of Ruin or World of Chaos. I don't remember the name of it. It has been like 4 years since I played this one, so I like the focus that. Just 1 second. Apologies for that. I just need to get that cough out of the way. The thing with the end of the game is that game lacks a lot of focus and makes you do what makes you have your own customizable ending, which I kind of like in a way because it's like replayable. But from the aspect of being so focused story wise, you may have had the freedom to do what you want, but you knew where you were going. You knew like the game had a push. It kind of has a sense of urgency that helps it. Whereas the end of the game is just like, yeah, you can go there, but in my head I'm like, but what happened to the others? And I'm like, but I'm also like, I don't know where to go at all, and this place is like kind of terrifying to navigate. Obviously, everyone mentions Dancing Man. It is incredibly good. Kefka as a villain, I've grown to appreciate more having since played it. I don't think he's my favorite villain by any means, but he is a solid villain, and the progression he has is very good. FF7, moving on, is S tier. Quite easy for me to say that one. This is one of my basically my favorite story of all time. I have genuinely loved the story beyond belief. I just love the places you visit, the characters, the honestly the writing of how the characters are just written, how the plot is handled, the way everything's revealed to you. Like obviously the Nibelheim flashback, the way that the storytelling in this done is so fantastic. The foreshadowing, it makes it so good to just replay it because this is just a game that oozes charm and you just get something new from it each time, and it's just utterly unbelievable. Gameplay wise, it's more or less like 6 and 5, or 6 and 4 really. Five is more like the old ones. I feel like. Um, but no, it's like the materia system is a phenomenal thing to use. Like I've never enjoyed a system more than Materia because it's just so customizable without even thinking. It's very easy strategy to do. Like you can do cure all, electrical, but you can get so much more than that, and you don't have to. It's just enjoyable. The limit system is probably my favorite one. I think it's the best one without being absolutely absurdly awkward to use. And yeah, the world itself is fantastic. I love just every location. There's only a couple of locations I genuinely don't like, and they're just like meh. They're okay. They're not bad. It's like the town that Barrett comes from. It's an okay location. It's just okay, but it's like if that's the bar I'm setting myself, then I know it's good. This, villain wise, Sephiroth is fantastic. I think he's absolutely iconic for a reason. The music is fantastic, and as the remake showed, I just utterly love these characters. They're just so great. I personally don't really get affected by the Aerith death that much, but it is a big moment. And having played F7 more, I do appreciate it more just for how it affects the party really. FF8 is just some game that I have a lot of conflicting feelings towards because both gameplay wise and story wise, this game has a lot of conflict and contradictions within itself. I'll start with story wise because we know FF8. I think a lot of people know the soundtrack on 8 is absolutely wonderful. I think it's one of its biggest selling points. It's just, do you want to hear Man with a Machine Gun? Yeah, absolutely. Story wise, I think it goes for a lot more grounded. I feel it feels like a lot more like the modern like 13, 15, where it's like you're in a militaristic or kind of basic fantasy world with Final Fantasy elements littered around, and story wise, it is good for the first disc and a half because I love just going through these militaristic areas like the train segment. I can't remember the name of the town. The names in this game are kind of very hard for me to remember, but I do like just going on missions. Basically, going like, yo, go kill a sorcerer. So, excuse me. I really did like the towns in this world, but the issue is it's a very empty world. It feels like, and it's just it leaves a lot to be desired after 7 and 6. It just was so much life in it. Like obviously, I know there's probably just as many locations. It felt more alive. Story wise, this one I think is enjoyable. It just starts to go off the rails. Disc 2, Disc 3, after the basketball scene, and obviously revealing that the pie's just connected. It felt like they were just trying to connect plot points for the sake of plot point, because I don't think it goes anywhere, and then you get significant whiplash with the third disc onwards because the romance and the sci-fi start to just heavily come over, and feels like it's like definitely the sci-fi segment feels like it comes out of nowhere, and it's like a bit like okay. It kind of threw me off a little bit and definitely took me out of it, especially with this constant changing of villains, none of whom you have any attachment for. You don't really enjoy seeing. You don't even speak to Ultimates in the game, which again, same thing happened with Sephiroth technically, but his presence was a lot more personal and intimate during the game. He was there in presence, whereas Ultimecia, you don't really feel it. Gameplay wise, the contradiction there is the junction system. Whilst it is a nice complex system to use, it is interesting. It promotes attack and limit spam, in my opinion, because whilst it is really cool to be like, yo, if you get magic, you can push this and make your stats better. It just promotes don't use magic kind of mentality, because why would you unless you desperately had to, because you just can get weaker from it. It's against your best interest in most cases to not to use magic. You want to attack, which either leads to a significant grind or just min-maxing, which again I don't particularly find fun for a game that is an RPG, because the game definitely tries to have its cake and eat it too with the level scaling on top of that. Because I feel if the game had no level scaling, then this whole junction system would be a lot more lenient and enjoyable. But then I think they would just honestly, I think a lot of this comes from trying to be drastically different from 8, from having 8 be different from 7, because a lot of this, I've never seen a more different jump from 2 games from these two than I had in any of the other ones here. This one's absolutely a B tier. Similarly to 8, I think this one is just drops in quality in the third disc onwards, but I think for the first two, it's an utterly fantastic experience. Character-wise, the writing is so fantastic, it makes me attached to all the characters, even if I don't particularly like Kina or Steiner, really. But like, it's just a very well story. It feels like a play, and the game really revels in that. I do appreciate that. I do like the sense of urgency the plot has, the going into the unknown that the first two discs have. It does it really well, because you don't know what's coming up, but you also believe it, and the game kind of starts to lose that sense of belief towards the end, because you're just going to all these more random places, and I think the game maybe just burns itself out. Music wise, very solid, whilst it's very solid but not great. Like, there's good tracks there. Character wise, is its strong suit. Vivi is probably one of my favourite Final Fantasy characters, but therein lies the problem of FF9. He kind of disappears in the third disc, story wise. Yes, that's because his character arc's kind of complete. But when I kind of love 9 for the character focus, when you start to see it disappear, it kind of starts to go like, oh, I'm a bit disappointed in that. FF9's gameplay, solid. I love the basically being able to see other people what they're doing on the map, and just having little events. It makes it feel way deeper. It makes it feel like way more a living, breathing. It makes me way interested, honestly, in the characters. I'm like, if you're given the option to see what they're up to and just their little dialogues, that definitely helps like the play kind of aspect of this, because it feels like Romeo, Romeo kind of aspect, and they just go monologuing like they would in a Shakespeare play. Gameplay wise, in terms of combat, I think is where this game is let down, because whilst the actual combat itself is solid, it's just incredibly slow, and it makes the game. I think that's what helps to cause the game to burn itself out, because combat wise is a bit. The upgrade system is fantastic. I will give it that. The way it does it is like, yo, you can learn the abilities, and you can just become an absolute monster with it. It's absolutely cool. The other thing letting it down gameplay wise is Trance. I think it's one of the weakest forms of limits in this series, because it just turns itself on, which is a cool concept, but I don't like the fact that you just could barely use it, because if you leave battle without using it, once it's turned on, whoops, you lost it. I think it's one of those ones where it needed a bit more refinement to make it better. And I think a B tier is fantastically correct for this one, in my opinion. If the little niggling points had been better, comfortable A rank, comfortable. FF10 is just an S tier. It resonates with me emotionally so much. I love Tidus. I love Yuna. Those two just make the game for me. I find Tidus so relatable. He literally asks all the questions that I would, and yeah, the music is solid. The world is solid. Its voice is not great, but the I find the characters and the gameplay incredibly good. This is the best combat system in the series by a country mile. I love how fluid it is, how basically the pace of the battle is as customizable as you want it to be, and pretty much it's seeing the on the left, like, the turn order, it helps with the strategy. The sphere grid is fantastic for just customizing, and every character feels so different, which is something that the FF games obviously force down your throat a lot, apart from 7 and 5. But it just kind of it didn't feel like obnoxious, like, oh, I'm stuck with this character. Oh boy, it felt really enjoyable, and it felt really rewarding doing well in combat. I think the only thing letting down 10 is probably its side content, because yeah, the side content isn't great. The ending is one of the best. Is probably the best FF ending. It is such a tearjerker. It is so good, and I am very happy saying these are the three best FF games, because these are the ones that actually resonate with me emotionally so much. Because even 9 has a phenomenal ending. It's even again a tearjerker, but these ones just stick with me much more. I think 12 is a solid B tier, especially with the Zodiac Age. I think it's a very slow game, but the game definitely benefits in the Zodiac Age from the speed up. It helps the pacing of it significantly, just because a lot of the areas are huge and getting through them can be a bit of a chore, especially if like you're dying, cause sometimes they're a bit hard. I think Ivalice is the best. It is the peak of Final Fantasy World. It is so wonderful to explore. It has this kind of very Final Fantasy feeling of the world. It's kind of modern yet really old, and it's just so well done. There's like it even has the kind of mystery, the fantastic, like the fantasy elements when you go south. It gives you, it ticks off all the boxes for the world that I could ever want. And battle wise, I think it does feel like a single player MMO, which is to its benefit, because the Gambit system, it makes it very enjoyable whilst being an autopilot, because definitely the focus of this is there's a battle here, but go and explore the world. Come on, explore the world, and it really does help complement it in that way. I think it's let down here by the story and dialogue, because it definitely feels very like hard for me to keep up with the story, because I'm not very well versed with the jargon of it, a lot of it goes over my head. I definitely do like Balthier, Ash, and Bosch, but the rest of the cast kind of incredibly forgettable to me, which is a shame, because the game really tries to put a lot of focus on Vaughn because it's from his perspective, and I'm like, please stop it. But yeah, I think this game is just overall a solid BT. It's a good game. 13 is just comfortably in C. This game burns itself out so severely. The whole linear thing, everyone knows it's a linear game, but it's linear by the most linear means. It's one of those ones where it's like you have no option but to walk forward. Even in 7 remake, which is done by the same director, I think Toriyama, even that has little, it doesn't, it paces itself better. these segments don't go on as much, so you don't feel the fatigue. You have areas where you can stop and look every so often, and that one's also just, like a 30-hour game rather than a 60-hour game. Because this game definitely burns itself out towards the end. I kind of completely lost interest in the story once you got to Cocoon, because this whole story was, let's get back to Cocoon for about 3 chapters, and you're just like, come on, we're waiting for the final boss. It genuinely felt like a lot of padding, because they need, like, oh, we need to actually add some side content in here. Combat wise, I genuinely do like it though, because I do like this whole constant management system. I like, you may not be doing all the attacks, but you're managing the situation. You gotta read the situation. It's a nice, like, read of it. I do appreciate that. Obviously, musically phenomenal. Everyone knows the 13, 15 games are like, oh, lovely. Music wise, character wise, it is very, very weak, especially because the way the story is told, of like jumping around, filling in gaps here and there. You just don't get attached to any of the characters because it's told in such a poor way. Why would you care about Vanille and Fang? Because the way they're portrayed is just so poorly done. It makes you feel like horrible people. And the same with SARS. It's just like, you don't feel any remorse, you don't feel any sympathy for him, because you don't find out about Daj for ages, and it's the game tries to be very vague, and it doesn't help. This also has the dialogue issue that 12 has, which is just jargon everywhere, and it's just like, oh, what? Yeah, I don't think it's the worst Final Fantasy game like everyone makes it out to be. I think it's still pretty bad though. I didn't mention 10-2 earlier. I kind of accidentally skipped past it, but I think 10-2 is D tier, because I think, whilst I do enjoy going back to 10's world, I just can't. I struggle with it significantly. I think gameplay wise, the battle system is good. Even I think it is comparable to 13 in the way of how it flows and the ideas behind it. But the story is just so like weighted in terms of my dislike of this game. Because 10 is perfectly bookended, and this one just felt like unneeded, and every character felt incredibly off. Even when you have Tidus and Lulu, Tidus, Waka and Lulu in the game, barely, they felt wrong. They felt incredibly wrong. I didn't like that. I think the combat is a lot better than people get credit for, and side content wise, there's a lot of like optional things for replayability, but the story just brings it down too far for me. 13-2 surprisingly is an A tier for me. I utterly love the villain. I love how much freedom and choice you had with this game. I like how time travel is done in this, and how do I put that? I like how you can just go to various areas at different times and see the changes of them. You change one thing here, or it changes this thing here. I know, like, there's a lot of like sense of disbelief you gotta have for time travel, but I enjoyed it. I liked this sense of what the hell's going on. We got to stop Caius from basically destroying the timeline, which is cool because he wins. I think Caius is in my top 3 Final Fantasy villains. For reference, it is Sephiroth, Caius, and Arden, who are my 3 favourites. And yeah, I think battle system wise, I think it's a lot more focused because of the lack of party members. I think having 2 party members and a third customizable one, it gives it a lot more focus and a lot less being bloated, because 13 constantly going, oh, these characters. I think in 13, if they had set and gone, this character is this role, I would have found it a lot more bearable. The obvious reason why they didn't do it in the first 13 ones, because you're stuck with some of them the whole time. You needed the basic stuff to get through, because otherwise you could quite comfortably get walled. Yeah, I think that the side content in 13-2 is a big step up from 13. The tone of the game, I think, is really good, and it's not too long. It's not too long to the point where it burns itself out. I think it goes on the right amount of time. I just honestly very much liked it. I found the characters a lot more likable, written a lot better. Like, I see hope in this game. I really like hope in this game, despite not liking him at all in 13 and Lightning Returns. He just exists for the sake of existing. Lightning Returns D tier. I again, like 8. This has so much contradictions with itself that I just can't oversee it. I'll start with gameplay. The main way of progressing is to get experience from doing side quests, but you're in a time frame similar to Dead Rising, which really irritates me because the game's telling you go and do side stuff, but the game's also saying go and rush and do like main game, which in a first playthrough is absolutely jarring because you're gonna rush around and just do the main story because you don't have enough time, because you do a lot of one and it goes, hey, wait, and you're like, oh, because if you play the game multiple times, you get the replayability benefit of knowing that, okay, this one's going to be here, so I can be the other main quest here and just dot it all around, do side quests in between, which is, this game definitely gets better as you replay it, but from a first playthrough, it's incredibly jarring and a bit tedious, annoyingly. I think it throws a lot of 13.2's promise out the window, and it goes, yeah, Caius was a great villain in 13.2. He's just there. The world's just there. The characters are just very bland in this one, even though they're still there. They're just so bland. Characters like Caius, you thought would be basically like, yo, I got to live with I forget the name of the character, but I know exactly one in my head. He just doesn't care. The one character I did genuinely like, and this is SARS, because he's like all over the place and honestly enjoyable. But like Snow just felt like he had conflict for the sake of conflict. No, I felt was ruined. And whilst the ending is pretty good, I just think story-wise it just absolutely burned me quite significantly. But I think the combat is honestly pretty good, but I just don't think it's enough to redeem this game. 14, I played only around Reborn. I'm not a big MMO fan, so I don't have much to say, but I think it was a pretty cool world, and that's what really I'm judging it most of. I did like the world of this quite a bit. I am going to return to it and play through Heavensward relatively soon, depending on how stuck into PS5 I get. Finally, FF15, much to another surprise, is an A tier. This game resonates with me just as much emotionally as these do, but I just know it deep down it is a little bit less quality. I think that's more just because of how unfinished it was. If the whole game had come out at once, as it did, as like with episode R and up to that, obviously adjusted for not having the Dawn of the Future kind of thing, I would probably put it in S tier, but it's just that whole drip feeding aspect of it kind of let it down. Arden is one of my favourite villains of all time. He's so charming. He has that charm. This game has a lot of charm, even though it's a bit like whiplashy in terms of its themes, its pacing. I I love the bros enough and the story enough. The storytelling is let down, definitely, but there's a lot of stuff here. The music, there's a lot of stuff here I just genuinely adore, and it kind of just makes up for a lot of the issues. I think if the issues weren't there, again, like I said, it would be a S tier comfortably. And honestly, this is like, I'm very happy with this tier list. And yeah, um, if you were, I'll be doing my podcast weekly on twitch.tv/thegel2. You see in the description. Any other ideas or any points you want to raise up in the comments, just let me know. Thanks for watching.